Nightlife behind the Berlin Wall. When we talk about Cold War Berlin, we usually think about concrete, walls, watchtowers and checkpoints. But this was also one of the most hedonistic cities in Europe. As governments traded threats, young Berliners traded their cassette tapes, their eyeliner and fake passports across into another kind of world, the underground club scene. And what is fascinating is that this scene didn't grow in spite of the Cold War, it grew because of it. When the wall went up in 1961, West Berlin became a kind of island, technically part of West Germany, but surrounded by the East. The government poured in money to stop people from leaving. There were tax breaks, rent controls, and crucially, an exemption from national service. That means that thousands of young men moved there to avoid the national draft. And suddenly you had this community of thousands of students, artists, musicians living cheaply in half-empty buildings. Where you get cheap rent, you get culture. This is how Berlin's alternative nightlife really began. One of the first hubs was SO36, a former ballroom in Kreuzberg. It started as a punk club in the late 1970s, the kind of place where people were more likely to throw their beers than to actually drink them. Bands like the Dead Kennedys played there, and it became a meeting place for punks, squatters collectives, and West Berlin's ever-growing queer scene. SO36 wasn't just a music scene, it was political. Kreuzberg sat just along the Berlin Wall, literally right at the edge of West Berlin. That gave it a strange energy, half defensive, half liberated. The city had a permanent sense of both being threatened and untouchable. Across the border in the east, things were different, but not entirely quiet. People also found ways to carve out small freedoms, often through secret concerts or apartment discos. These were technically illegal, you needed special permission to host public gatherings, but people still did it. If West Berlin had SO36, then East Berlin had, well, whatever people could get away with. There were no official nightclubs that resembled the West punk dives or discos. Those were seen as bourgeoisie or Western. But there were basements, cafes, artist studios and private apartments where the volume went up after dark. One of the most famous was Zionkirch, a church that quietly hosted underground gigs in the 1980s. Punk was technically banned. That didn't stop bands from playing. Authorities would call it asocial, which was often enough to get you arrested. But pastors sympathetic to youth movements or just tired of state hypocrisy let them perform anyway. One police report from 1983, an East Berlin officer complained at least 60 persons gathered religious facility under the pretext of music. The atmosphere was nihilistic and hostile to the state, which of course was the point. The East subcultures thrived in the cracks, between church walls, behind closed doors and under the nose of the Stasi. But even here, a strange kind of tolerance developed. The regime couldn't arrest everyone with dyed hair and safety pins, so they monitored them instead. Many musicians later discovered their fans were actually informants. In some ways, those shadows gave the scene this intensity. The music was rawer and angrier. One former punk, Jane Schlosser, said, "We didn't have records or amps. We built them ourselves. We didn't want to sound Western, we wanted to sound like we were alive." Meanwhile, on the Western side, nightlife was evolving into something stranger. The West goes wild. In the 1970s and early 1980s, the De Schugel Club became the centre of West Berlin's high-low mix. Think Studio 54 with more cigarettes and less glamour. You'd find artists, models and politicians dancing under the same flickering lights. David Bowie, Iggy Pop and Grace Jones all passed through when they were visiting Berlin. And so while SO36 represented rebellion, the De Schugel Club was an escapism. Berliners knew their city was an island, both politically and literally. The walls surrounded them with planes and tunnels being the only way out. So nightlife became a kind of alternative coping mechanism. It was a strange kind of freedom, one that existed purely because Berlin had been cut off. Germany poured money into the city to keep it alive, and that created a bubble economy. Artists got grants to stay, rent was almost nothing, and nobody expected you to have a normal life. And of course, with that freedom came its own darkness. West Berlin was still under heavy surveillance. Drugs were everywhere, and police often looked the other way. In 1981, a West Berlin senator said, "If heroin comes to Kreuzberg, it will stop at the wall." It didn't. Addiction ran deep in the same neighbourhoods that birthed Berlin's creative energy. There were also scandals that exposed just how political even the party scene could be. In 1978, the Stasi infiltrated West Berlin nightclubs, trying to recruit informants, collect intelligence on Western politicians. Later, after reunification, files revealed that several well-known club owners had been secretly feeding information over the border in exchange for travel privileges or cash. But even in the East, people pushed back with creativity. In 1986, artist Tabea Blumenschein helped organise a fashion show that doubled as a queer performance night in a small East Berlin apartment. It was risky because homosexuality wasn't criminalised anymore, but it was still heavily policed. The walls come down and the clubs finally take over. When the wall fell in 1989, the city's underground literally broke into the open. Abandoned factories, power stations, and bunkers in East Berlin suddenly became available. The empty spaces became a fountain for a new kind of culture, the techno clubs of the 1990s. Tresor opened in a disused bank vault in Mitte, which was one of the very first. It quickly became a symbol of a new unified Berlin, raw, industrial, and endlessly loud. Techno, with its repetitive beats and lack of lyrics, felt like the sound of a city trying to start over. And inside the club's walls, it didn't really matter if you grew up in the East or West. After 1989, Berlin suddenly had too much space. Warehouses, schools, and department stores that nobody quite owned. But that is what made it magical. For a few years, the city lived in a kind of new grey zone, where everything felt possible and nobody was really in charge. This openness wasn't entirely new, it was just the next chapter in a divided city's long experiment with freedom. The biggest difference between the East and the West was nightlife had always been about access. In the West, clubs like Schugel, Metropole and SO36 were public, messy and defiantly loud. Were protected in the way by the city's subsidiaries and political exceptionalism. You could live cheaply, protest loudly and stay out until sunrise. The state wanted West Berlin to look like a showcase of liberal democracy, and that meant tolerating the weirdness. In the East, nightlife existed in the shadow. Clubs were private apartments, bedrooms, or church halls where people would bring their own speakers and play band records. Westerners did openly, Easterners did with whispers and watchfulness. You didn't queue out the door, you got invited. You didn't post flyers, you would trust the word of mouth. Freedom, therefore, meant two different things. In the West, was freedom to experiment, to rebel, and to waste time. And in the East, it was freedom from surveillance, from conformity, and from the crushing sameness of state-controlled life. When the wall came down, these two types of freedom collided. For a while, Berlin's empty East became a playground for both sides. Squats, raves, art installations and ruins. The boundary between illegal and legal were blurred again. In 1991, Tresor opened in a former East German vault. E-Work took over an old power plant, and Berghain grew out of the same lineage of reclaimed space. And that duality, the city as a cage and as an escape, still defines Berlin today. Nightlife tourism has become an industry built on the mythology of those in-between areas. Every weekend, thousands of people queue outside Berghain, chasing an authenticity that was born out of Cold War tension. And this kind of freedom grows in the ruins. Well, of course, it's not the same anymore. Squats are art galleries. The warehouses are luxury flats, and Kreuzberg's anarchist edges have softened into artisanal coffee. The West has more polished international venues, still holds wider stranger clubs and places hidden beneath unmarked doors and down alleyways. And that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this look at club culture in East and West Berlin. And if you liked it, give us a like and subscribe for more. I bring out new episodes every Tuesday. All right, goodbye.